So, welcome, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. So, my name is Harshini Rananjali, working as Carbon and Sustainability Program Manager. So, today's webinar is about avoid greenwashing, making credible climate claims through validation and verification. So over the next 35-40 minutes, we will discuss one of the biggest challenges organization face today. So it's about proving that their environment claims are credible. So, sustainability is no longer an optional because customers, investors, regulators, they expect, demand it, and require this sustainability. But making these kind of environmental claims without proper evidence can create significant legal, financial, and reputational risk. So today's discussion is about how organizations can confidentially communicate climate performance while avoiding greenwashing through internationally recognized standards and independent validation and verification. So let's begin. So, yeah, I like to begin with a simple question. One simple question. Can you actually trust every environmental claims you see today? Everywhere we look, we see statements like carbon neutral, we are net zero, our product is net zero, eco-friendly, climate positive, sustainable. So these words have become incredibly common. So the problem is not that these terms are actually wrong. The problem is that many of these claims are made without sufficient evidence. So as consumers and stakeholders become more informed, they are no longer satisfied with marketing slogans like carbon neutral, sustainable, eco-friendly, likewise. So they ask, because they are very well informed now, they ask, how did you calculate this? Who verified it? Where is the evidence? So the era of simply saying the trust us is ending. So today's organizations are expected to demonstrate transparency through measurable data and independent assurance. That's why in this slide, the final statement says it perfectly, like, cool, prove it. So that is becoming the expectation from regulators, customers, and other stakeholders. So some warning signs that immediately raise concerns includes a company announcing net zero by 2040 without explaining what they are actually doing this year. And there are some targets with no baseline. Like, for an example, we will reduce emission by 40%. 40% compared to what? So you have to have a baseline. So another common issue is highlighting one successful environmental initiative while ignoring much larger impacts. That is okay, that is fine to quantify and disclose your a successful environmental initiative, but it has not be hinder the large environment impacts throughout the supply chain. uh, that's it. And also, going with the carbon, purchasing carbon credits and disclosing your carbon neutral, that is also kind of a greenwashing, we would say. Like, offsets have their place, that's true, but they should never become a substitute for reducing emissions. So finally, if nobody inside the organization can explain how the environment numbers were calculated, that should immediately raise questions about the credibility. So that's why greenwashing, the name, the term greenwashing is there. So what exactly is greenwashing? The United Nations define greenwashing as misleading the public into believing that an organization is doing more to protect the environment than it actually is. So this is very important definition because greenwashing isn't always intentional. It can be unintentional. Sometimes it results from poor data, incorrect methodologies, misunderstanding clauses, standards, poor communication. So as sustainability reporting or these requirements becomes more widespread, organization, it's natural that they want to showcase positive achievements. But these achievements, these claims cannot be exaggregated, cannot be selective, or cannot be unsupported. So they will become misleading if that is the case. So I would say the greenwashing exists on like a spectrum. It can range from overly optimistic marketing language to deliberately false environmental claims. So either way, the results are same and it will damage your reputation. Stakeholders lost trust. So that is why Planet Tracker, it's a non-profit think tank. They have identified 6 common forms of greenwashing. So let's briefly look at one by one. Green lighting. So the green lighting is what it means is promoting one positive environment initiative to distract from a larger environmental impacts. And the second type is green crowding. Joining sustainability initiatives but making little progress by moving only as fast as the slowest participant. And then green shifting. This shifts the responsibility onto consumers. Instead of reducing the emissions, companies ask customers to make greener choices while making few operational improvements themselves. And the fourth one is green labeling. I would say this is probably one of the most common greenwashing term. Products displays labels such as like natural, eco, green, sustainable, eco, environmental friendly, without any recognized certification or scientific evidence. The labels should impressive, but they don't actually prove anything. So we call it as like a green labeling. And the fifth one is green rinsing. So this refers to repeated revising climate targets. This is also kind of common right now. The organizations sometimes announce we will be net zero by 2040. Then suddenly change it to 2040 and then 2050 without making like measurable progress. So we call it as green rinsing. And the sixth one is green hushing. Interestingly, some organizations now avoid discussing sustainability altogether. So they are afraid that any claim could be challenged. This is known as green hushing. So remaining silent is also not the solution either. So organizations should communicate, but only with credible evidence. So all these are 6 types of greenwashings that has been identified by a think tanker. So, yeah, so far we have discussed what greenwashing is and why regulators are becoming more concerned about misleading environmental claims. But this isn't just a theoretical issue anymore. Around the world, regulators are taking enforcement actions and companies are facing significant financial penalties. So let me share one examples. I'm not going to give like so many examples on this because some of the cases are still pending, court cases are still ongoing. So I just take one example to showcase. I think all of you are aware what Shein is. It's an online platform to purchase goods and products from different countries. So in Italy, Shame in Italy, the Italian Competition Authority investigated environmental claims made on Shane's website, including statements under initiatives such as like evolution, hashtag Shane the No. So the regulator found these several of these claims were too vague, overly broad, lacked sufficient evidence. So some products promoted as recyclable or more sustainable and did not adequately actually support these claims. So as a result, Shane was fined like 1 million euros. And same thing happened with French authorities. They have imposed a 40 million euros penalty after identifying misleading pricing practices alongside false or exaggerated environment claims. So this shows that regulators are looking not only at the products themselves, but also at how sustainable information is communicated. So it's not about how your product is sustainable. Also, the regulators will check how you communicate your sustainability performance through your website, social media, likewise. Yeah. Now that we have seen the consequences of greenwashing, so let's focus on more on important question. How can organizations avoid it? There are 5 practical principles every organization should follow. First, substantiate every claim. Before making any environment statement, whether it's about carbon neutrality, recycled content, reduced emissions, ask yourself, actually, can you prove it? So every claim should be backed by credible data, recognized methodology, and where appropriate, independent validation or verification. So the evidence should always come before marketing. And the second one is reduce before you offset. So the organization should first reduce emissions within their own operations and value chain before relying on carbon credits. As you can show here, reduce, replace, remove, and then offsets. Offsetting should always be the last step, not the first at all. Then the third one, think beyond the product. Consider the entire life cycle from raw materials and manufacturing, and then the product use, end of life cycle. So the product should not be called sustainable based on just one stage of its life cycle. You can calculate the emission for one stage of life cycle for a product for the decision making, but it should not hinder the life cycle emissions of that particular product. So think beyond the product. You have to think about the entire life cycle process when you publish your greenhouse gas emissions. Or yeah. Then the fourth one is be transparent. Be open about both the achievements and limitations. Clearly explain your methodology, reporting boundaries, assumptions, data, and progress towards targets. Transparency is the key to building trust to your stakeholders. So you have to be open about both your achievements plus the limitations. Finally, use internationally recognized standards and seek independent validation and verification. So the independent assurance will give stakeholders confidence that your claims are credible and evidence-based. So these 5 principles provide a practical roadmap for avoiding greenwashing. But today, they are no longer like best practices. They are increasingly becoming legal expectations as well. So far we have discussed what greenwashing is and what green organizations can avoid it. But why has this become such an important topic? As we discussed earlier, because regulators around the world are now introducing new mandatory laws and regulations. So organizations are now expected to provide reliable data, transparent methodologies, independent assurance for the sustainability informations what they have reported. So let's now move to one of the most significant development in sustainability report. You may already heard this directive. It's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. We call it as CSRD. So many of you are like have already have an idea about CSRD, but I'd like to briefly explain its purposes before we look at the recent updates. So CSRD is an EU regulated designed to improve the quality, consistency, transparency, and comparability of sustainable reporting. So the objective is to bring sustainability reporting closer to financial reporting by requiring companies to disclose their ESGs, that means environment, social, and governance performance, using a very unique framework. We call it as European Sustainability Reporting Standard. So this framework has to be adapted when you are reporting your sustainability informations under CSRD. So another important concept introduced by CSRD is double materiality. So this means companies must report not only how sustainability issues affect their business, but also how their activities impact people, society, and the environment. So importantly, sustainability information report under CSRD is expected to subject to independent assurance. So increasing confidence for investors, regulators, customers, and other stakeholders, this CSRD has been developed. So, however, like following feedbacks from business on the complexity of the original requirements, now European Commission recently proposed several simplification through the omnibus simplification package. You know, small and medium companies, some of the requirements are very complex to adapt. So now, because of their feedbacks, now European Commission has prepare a proposal to simplify these requirements. So let's now look at what has changed in CSRD. So the biggest change is the scope. As you can see here, previously CSRD applied to large companies meeting two of three criteria, like it has to be more than 200 employees, 50 million turnover, 50 million euro turnover, or 25 million euro in total assets. So that means many listed SMEs were also expected to report under previous requirements. But under the omnibus proposal, the scope is much narrower. So focusing mainly on companies with more than 1,000 employees and over 450 million euros annual turnover has to be there. This means many companies originally expected to report are now outside the mandatory scope. And the second change related to the value chain reporting. So previously, SMEs often receive extensive sustainability data requests from larger companies. The new value chain cap limits these requests, meaning companies with fewer than 1,000 employees cannot be required to provide information beyond the voluntary reporting period standard. So this significantly reduces the reporting burden on SMEs as well. And then the proposal also clarified the rule for non-EU companies. They will only be in scope if they generate more than 450 million euros turnover within the EU and a significant EU subsidiary or branch. So this provides greater certainty for multinational organizations as well. And finally, ESRS requirements also now being simplified. So the number of mandatory disclosures has been reduced. So then now the reporting becomes more practical while still like focusing on the information most relevant to investors and stakeholders. So overall, the omnibus package changes who reports and how much they report actually now, but does not change the importance of transparent, credible, and independently assured sustainability reporting. So that's all about CSRD, and let's now move on to another important piece of legislation, that is empowering consumers for green transition directive. So unlike CSRD, which focus on sustainability reporting, this directive focus on the environmental claims organizations make to consumers. The main objective is to ensure that consumers receive clear, evidence-based information, helping them make informed purchasing decisions while reducing the risk of greenwashing. There are several key requirements under this directive. First is the generic environment claims such as green, eco-friendly, environment-friendly can no longer be used unless they are supported by recognized scientific evidence. So simply using these terms for marketing is no longer sufficient. Second, climate-related claim such as carbon neutral, climate positive, cannot rely solely on carbon offsets. Organizations must first demonstrate meaningful reductions in their own greenhouse gas emissions before making these claims. And another important requirement relates to the environment labels. Only labels established by public authorities, approved by public authorities, or recognized independent certification or validation verification scheme will be permitted, helping prevent misleading self-created labels. So the directive also addresses future environment commitments as well. So claims such as we will become net zero by 2040, climate neutral by 2050 must be backed by credible transition plan with measurable targets, implementation actions, allocated resources. So in other words, organization must show not only where they want to go, but also how they plan to get there. So that is about this directive and the implementation timeline. The directive entered into force on 26 March 2024, becoming official EU legislation. However, member states have until 27 September 2026 this year to transport it into their national laws. So that's about the directive. And let's now move to another important European regulation, corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. We called it as CS3D because there are like three Ds in the directive. So Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. So CSRD focus on reporting, that's right. But CS3D focus on action. In simple terms, CSRD ask what are you reporting, whereas this directive asks what are you doing to manage sustainability risk. So the objective of this directive is to promote responsible business conduct by requiring companies to identify, prevent, mitigate, and where necessary address adverse impacts on human rights and environments. So the companies must assess risk across their suppliers, contractors, subsidiaries, distribute throughout their value chain. This is because many sustainability risks, such as like deforestation, excessive greenhouse gas emissions, child labor, unsafe working conditions often occur within the supply chain rather than inside the company's own facilities. That's why this directive has been introduced. So the directive introduced four key requirements. One is due diligence. So the organization must establish an ongoing process to identify, assess, prevent, mitigate, remediate sustainability impacts. And the second one is the climate transition plan. So the companies are expected to develop a transition plan aligned with the Paris Agreement and the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 Celsius. This means setting clear carbonization targets, defining responsibilities, and monitoring progress. Third requirement is value chain responsibility. So, under this directive, responsibility extends beyond direct operations to suppliers and other business relations. You have to consider the entire value chain, not just one particular production. And finally, monitoring and public communication. So the companies must regularly review the effectiveness of their due diligence measures, engage with stakeholders, and communicate their progress transparently. You have to monitor your measures, due diligence, and you have to update your stakeholders, get the comments from the stakeholders. You have to have this kind of a monitoring and reporting plan as well under this directive. So the implementation timeline, this is entered into force in July 2024. And as you can see, member states are now transposing it into national legislations, and the requirements will be introduced in phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, starting with the largest companies before expanding to others. As you can see here, the phases. So yes, so CSRD tells organization what to report. CS3D, this directive requires them to demonstrate that they are actively managing sustainability risk across their entire value chain. So yeah, so many of you have heard about CBAM as well, CSRD, CS3D, now CBAM. So particularly if your organization exports product to the European Union, you probably have to adhere the CBAM regulation. It's mandatory. It's mandatory. So, but let's first understand why CBAM was introduced. The primary objective of CBAM is to prevent what is known as carbon leakage. So the carbon leakage occurs when companies relocate production from countries with strict climate policies to countries with less stringent environment regulations in order to reduce the cost. So while this may actually lower emissions within the Europe, global greenhouse gas emission remains unchanged or may even increase. So to address this issue, EU introduced this CBAM to ensure the imported goods face a carbon cost comparable to product manufactured within the EU under the EU emission trading system. The principle is simple here. So if two products have the same like carbon footprint, they should face a similar carbon price regardless of whether they are produced, regardless of where they are produced. So initially, this CBAM applies to carbon intensive sectors including cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilizer, electricity, hydrogen. Why? Because these sectors have high greenhouse gas emissions and are like considered to be at the greatest risk of carbon leakage. So there are phases under CBAM. So phase 1 is the transition period. In this phase, it began on 1st of October 2023, and during this period, importers are not required to purchase CBAM certificates. Instead, their main responsibility is to collect and report the embedded greenhouse gas emissions. So under phase 2, we called it as definitive regime. So it begins on 1st January 2026, that means this year. So from this year onwards, CBAM moves from being a reporting exercise to a compliance mechanism. So importers will be required to calculate the embedded emissions using EU-approved methodology, submit verified emissions information, purchase CBAM certificates, so all of it. So in other words, organization will not only report emissions, they will also face financial obligations linked to these emissions. Another important aspect here is that independent verification is also mandatory. So as the definitive phase begins, the quality and credibility of the emission data become increasingly important. That's why this independent verification helps to ensure that the reported emissions are accurate, complete, and compliant with the CBAM requirements. So that's about CBAM. And let's look at a little bit on EU ETS too. So many of you are probably familiar with the original EU ETS, which has been operating since 2005. So it's covered larger industrial facilities, power generation, aviation, maritime transportation, etc. However, emissions from road transport and buildings were not reducing quickly enough to meet the EU's climate targets. That's why, to address this, EU introduced this separate EU ETS 2 as part of Fit for 55 package, which aim to reduce net greenhouse gas emission by at least 55% by 2030. So EU ETS 2 focuses on fuel suppliers for road transport, buildings, and certain additional sectors. So the principle remains the same, putting a price on the carbon to encourage energy efficiency, cleaner energy sources, and lower greenhouse gas emission. So the implementation timeline, so the MRV requirements has already begun and allowing companies to establish reporting system, and the carbon pricing mechanism is expected to start in 2027. However, with this war and other conditions, If energy prices remain exceptionally high, implementation may be delayed until 2028. So that's about EU ETS too. So we have a very fresh scheme now apart from EU ETS. Okay, before we moving into the validation verification, I like to briefly highlight another important development with regards to greenhouse gas protocol. This relates to scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions under greenhouse gas protocol. So as many of you know, scope 3 emissions often represent the largest share of the organization carbon footprint. Typically, it is 70 to 80% of the total emission, obviously, making the companies critical to understanding organizations' overall climate impact. So, to improve the consistency and transparency, 𝐲𝐴 protocol is currently reviewing and updating the Scope 3 standard. This is still not published, this is still in proposal, but uh, however, they give us a good indication of where reporting requirements are heading. So one proposed update is 95% coverage threshold. So instead of reporting only selected relevant categories, organization may be expected to account for at least 95% of their required scope 3 emissions. So helping ensure that significant emission sources are not omitted. So another proposal is the introduction of category 16. Now greenhouse gas protocol under scope 3, there are 15 categories. They will introduce new category to cover facilitated emissions and licensing activities. This is very much related to financial companies. So all these proposals are still under consultation. So they clearly signal the future direction of greenhouse gas accounting. And then I like to briefly highlight two important ISO developments as well. First is ISO 14019. So this new standard that provides principles and requirements for the validation and verification of sustainability information. So we have previously standard to cover verification and validation standards to cover greenhouse gas emissions. Now we have a standard and which covers not only the greenhouse gas but much wider range of ESG topics like climate, biodiversity, water, and governance. So these standards help ensure that this information is consistent, reliable, and credible. And the other standard is ISO 14068. This is about carbon neutrality. You know, we have previously we had past 2060. Now it's no longer in the market. Now we have a separate ISO standard for carbon neutrality, which is ISO 14068. So the current version is being revised to better reflect today's climate expectations with greater emphasis on real emission reductions, because previously under past 2060 the reductions are not much motivated and it's not mandatory at all. Purchasing carbon offsetting and declare your company as carbon neutral is enough, but under ISO 14068-1 now you have to showcase your carbon reductions, and after that the remaining portion you can offset by purchasing carbon credits. That's how under ISO 14068-1 will work. Okay, another significant development in Europe is this framework. We call it as Carbon Removal and Carbon Farming Certification Framework, or CRCF. This is similar to, I would say, VCS, Verified Carbon Standard, and Gold Standard. Now, European Union has its first voluntary carbon certification framework. Now, the projects related to permanent removals, such as projects using technologies related to direct air carbon capture and storage, or carbon farming, which includes practices such as soil carbon sequestration, peatland restoration, improved forest management. These kind of projects now have opportunity to register in this framework and generate carbon credits over their projects. So now European Union has its first voluntary carbon certification framework. So the framework is built on four key principles. One is the credibility, transparency, comparability, and climate alignment. So CRCF is an important step towards building a trusted European voluntary carbon market, and independent validation and verification is very much essential, as same as verified carbon standard and gold standard. Okay, throughout today's webinar, we have discussed how sustainability reporting and climate claims are becoming increasingly regulated. We have looked at CSRD, CS3D, CBAM, EU 2 carbon market. So if there is one message connecting all of these development, it is this, like I can say, like the trust us wording is now over. We have entered a period now. We have to showcase the evidences. In the past, organization could make broader environmental claims, but today that is no longer enough. The regulators, investors, other stakeholders, customers, they expect organizations to provide objective evidence to support in every environment claim they make. That's why you can see on the left side of this slide that regulators are increasingly asking for evidence rather than promises, just marketing slogans. Whether it's EU Green Transition Directive, CSRD, CS3D, CBAM, EU ETS, they all have one thing in common. All these directives required validation and verification, the independent assurance. At the same time, as shown on the right side of the slide, greenwashing is becoming increasingly expensive. So you can see around the world, we are seeing multi-million euro investigations, stronger enforcement powers, and growing number of climate-related lawsuits, penalties. So some regulators can now impose penalties of up to 10% of companies' global turnover for misleading practices. So, how can organizations respond? The answer is the independent validation and the verification. An independent third party assess whether the reported greenhouse data, sustainability information, claims has been prepared according to the required standards and supported by objective evidence. It will significantly strengthen your transparency and build confidence among all of your stakeholders. That is why independent validation and verification is so much important. So now let's take a closer look at what validation and verification actually deliver. It will improve the data quality because during validation and verification engagement, we review the completeness of the greenhouse gas inventories, the calculations, the methodologies, the emission factors, assumptions. So the result is more reliable sustainability information and stronger internal reporting system. And the second one is it increases transparency. So stakeholders wants to understand where environment claims coming from. So the validation verification ensure that every environment claim can be traced back to the objective evidence, documented calculations, and transparent methodologies. Third is strengthening compliance. So organization today must comply with growing number of regulations and standards like CSRD, SSR, CBAM, EU ETS. So this independent validation verification help organization to demonstrate that they meet these requirements and are prepared for regulatory reviews or assurance activities. And finally, it's reduce the greenwashing risk. One of the most valuable outcome of the independent verification is that it tests whether public sustainability communications are also actually supported by evidence. So if a claim cannot be substantiated, it's far better to identify that during verification than after publication. So that is why it is very important to have independent validation and verification for your every claims. Yeah. As we come to the end of today's webinar, let's take a quick look at what lies ahead. So here are some of the key trends shaping future of the credible climate claims. Strong anti-greenwashing rules. So the governments are introducing stricter rules day by day to tackle greenwashing. So the focus is shifting from marketing claims to evidence-based communication. And then the mandatory sustainability reporting will continue to expand as well in the future. And then the digital monitoring and verification, like digital tools, AI, satellite monitoring, this will be improved in the future. So validation and verification can be more efficient. Your calculation can be more inaccurate. And also high integrity carbon markets will be there. It will be evolving. So the focus is moving towards high quality, independently validated, verified carbon credits. It will be there in the future as well. So, and then greater supply chain transparency. In the future, the supply chain data, how organization will be expected to understand and manage impact across their entire value chain, making reliable supply data more important than ever will be in the future. So these are future trends that shape credible climate claims. Okay, so as we come to final part of today's webinar, I'd like to briefly introduce BM Certification, our company, and explain who we are as well. So BM Certification is an independent, impartial, and internationally recognized certification and validation verification body. So we established in 2006 in Latvia with a clear purpose, like to prove reliable and internationally recognized conformity assessment services. So over the past 2 decades, we have grown from like local certification body into an international organization with 11 subsidiaries and 3 representatives and 9 license holders, as you can see here in the image. So one of the things we're particularly proud of is our accreditation journey in validation and verification. We have a lot of accreditation for other our services like FSCC, PEFC, ISCC, so on. But these accreditation mentioned in the slides are only applicable for the validation and verification body. So we have the accreditation for ISO 17029, ISO 14065, and ISO 17065. Under these accreditations, we are providing ISO 14064-1 organizational verifications, 64-2 project level verification, and verified carbon standard and gold standard, which is related to carbon removal and reduction projects, verifications and validations we are conducting at the moment. And all these services are we verified through ISO 14064-3 and other supportive documents. These are only the accredited services we have. And also we are performing non-accredited verifications as well, like carbon neutrality under ISO 14068-1, ISO 14067, water footprint verification, and etc. So these are about our validations, accreditations, and the services. And as climate regulations continue to evolve, so do our services. So at BM Certification, we are continuously expanding our validation verification portfolio to support organizations with emerging regulatory requirements. So this includes, we are planning to get the accreditation for CSRD, CRCF, the voluntary carbon framework, carbon farming framework, and CBAM, and EU ETS and ETS too. So these are the future plans for us to get the accreditation for these services. So our objective is to ensure that organizations have a trusted verification partner as the new regulations continue to emerge. Okay. So if your organization is beginning its sustainability reporting journey, preparing for verification, exploring carbon projects, we had be delighted to support you. So feel free to scan the QR code or contact us directly to arrange a short discussion about your needs. We know that every organization is different, and we had happy to help you identify the most appropriate certification or verification approach for your business. Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. I hope the session has provided at least useful insight into the rapidly evolving this sustainability landscape and the growing importance of this independent validation and verification. So, if you have any questions, we can, since we have used all of our time to the webinar, if you have questions, we can have like 2 or 3 minute discussion. So, if you don't have time to get to your questions today, or if you have think of something afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email. I'll be happy to continue the conversation and answer any questions you may have. So thank you once again for joining us today. So we will open the QA session now. Do you have any questions? Okay, great. So since we did not have any questions for the moment, I think we can wind up this session. So if you think of something afterward, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email. So thank you for joining once again today. I really appreciate your time and the participation. Bye bye. Oh, we have one question. What are the updates on SFGR? So it's currently undergoing its biggest reform, I think, after 2021. So I think it will replace Article 8 and 9 marketing with three sustainability product categories. Uh, like one of the biggest proposed change is that replacing this Article 8 and 9 classification with three clearer categories like sustainable, transition, and ESG basics. So and also these SFDR requirements will be revised to the disclosures to become a more simpler requirements than the way that it has been written before. So the shorter and simpler disclosure templates, fewer mandatory sustainability indicators will be there under updates as the updates for new revised SFDR. So yeah. So if you have any questions, please send us an email as I explained you earlier. So thank you for joining again. And yeah, wishing you good luck throughout this sustainability journey. Bye bye.